Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks. Dismissed!
Imagine America.
For 11 seasons, one show managed to make audiences laugh and cry, sometimes in the same scene. M*A*S*H wasn't just a hit sitcom. It became a cultural touchstone, a series so beloved that its finale is still the most watched scripted broadcast in American television history. But while the show looked seamless on screen, behind the cameras, things were anything but stable. Several major stars walked away, some quietly, some in storylines that shocked the entire country. So what really happened? Why did these actors choose to leave one of the most successful shows ever made? Let's dig into the real stories. Before M*A*S*H became a television phenomenon, it started as a novel. In the late 1960s, a former Korean War surgeon wrote a fictionalized account of his time at a mobile army surgical hospital, blending dark comedy with the brutal reality of war. The book found an audience, and a few years later it was adapted into a film that captured the same irreverent spirit, becoming both a critical success and a box office hit. Then came the television series. Premiering in 1972, M*A*S*H kept the wartime setting but slowed things down, giving its characters room to grow and evolve over time. Alan Alda took on the role of Hawkeye Pierce, and the show quickly became known for blending humor with genuine emotional weight. It struggled in its first season, but once it found its footing, it became a ratings powerhouse and a show that pushed boundaries other comedies wouldn't touch. As the series matured, so did its tone. The show leaned more heavily into character-driven storytelling and social commentary. And as that shift happened, not every actor on the cast felt like they were growing along with it. Some felt their characters were stuck. Others had personal struggles that made the demanding schedule unsustainable. Over its run, M*A*S*H saw a number of major cast departures, and each one tells a different story about life on a long-running show. If you ask longtime fans about the moment that hit them hardest, many will point to the end of the Season 3 finale, an episode that became one of the most talked-about moments in sitcom history. After an episode full of celebration and farewells, the final scene delivered a gut punch, a quiet announcement that the beloved commanding officer's plane had gone down, with no survivors. That character was Colonel Henry Blake, played by McLean Stevenson, and his exit marked the first major departure from the core cast. Stevenson had been part of the show since the very beginning, playing the well-meaning but often flustered commanding officer of the unit. His performance earned him widespread praise, including major award recognition in the early seasons. But as the show went on, the spotlight increasingly shifted toward Alan Alda's character, who was becoming more involved in writing and shaping the direction of the series. According to multiple accounts over the years, Stevenson grew frustrated with feeling like a supporting player in a show he'd helped build from the start. He had bigger ambitions and believed he had what it took to lead a series of his own. At the end of Season 3, he made the decision not to return. This left the show's creators with a choice. Traditionally, departing sitcom characters were written off gently, reassigned, sent home, given a tidy goodbye. But the writers saw an opportunity to remind audiences what the show was really about, a war story where not everyone makes it home. That decision became the now famous finale, where the episode spends most of its runtime on a joyful send-off before delivering its devastating final scene. The reaction from audiences was immediate and intense, with the network receiving an enormous volume of mail in response. As for Stevenson himself, his post-MASH career didn't go the way he hoped. He signed a deal for his own series, but it was canceled after one season, and a follow-up show fared even worse. In later interviews, he reflected on the decision with regret, acknowledging that leaving had been a mistake, and that the experience of being part of M*A*S*H was something he hadn't been able to recreate. Despite that, his former castmates spoke warmly of him over the years, and when he passed away in the mid-1990s, tributes came in from across the industry remembering him as a kind and talented performer. Looking back, his departure became one of the defining moments of the entire series, even if it wasn't the ending he had hoped for in his own career. If Stevenson's departure was loud and unforgettable, the next major exit was almost the opposite. One week a character was there, and the next he simply wasn't, with no farewell episode and no explanation given to viewers. That actor was Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John McIntyre, one half of the show's original comedic duo alongside Hawkeye. Their chemistry defined the early seasons, full of banter and mischief. But behind the scenes, Rogers reportedly felt the show wasn't delivering on what he'd signed up for. He had understood M*A*S*H to be a true ensemble piece, with the cast sharing the spotlight relatively evenly. As the series went on, though, much of the narrative weight shifted toward Hawkeye, who was becoming the emotional center of the show. Rogers later explained that his concern wasn't about ego. It was about whether his character still had meaningful material to work with. What makes this story unusual is how it played out logistically. Rogers had reportedly never signed a formal contract for the show, working instead on a handshake agreement. When he decided not to continue after season 3, the producers found themselves with no legal grounds to hold him to anything, since there was nothing in writing to enforce. His departure came together so abruptly that the writers had to scramble, opening season 4 with an explanation that his character had been discharged off-screen. To fill the gap, a new character was introduced, B.J. Honeycutt, played by Mike Farrell, who brought a more grounded and reflective energy to the role. The shift in tone was noticeable, and while some fans missed the original duo's chemistry, many also feel the show grew richer in the seasons that followed. As for Rogers, he didn't disappear from public life. He continued acting in smaller roles, but eventually built a second career as a financial investor, becoming a familiar face on business television in later decades. Despite the abrupt nature of his exit, there doesn't appear to have been any lasting tension between him and his former castmates, and Alda spoke fondly of their friendship for years afterward. When Rogers passed away in 2015, tributes from the cast reflected genuine affection for him, both as a colleague and as a friend. Of all the departures on this list, one of the most emotionally complex involved the actor who played the show's most beloved character. Gary Berghoff played Radar O'Reilly, the company clerk with an almost uncanny intuition, a character so iconic that Berghoff was the only actor to reprise his role from the original film into the television series. But by the later seasons, Berghoff was reportedly struggling. The demanding production schedule, combined with personal battles with anxiety and depression that weren't widely discussed at the time, took a toll. He was also navigating being away from his young family for long stretches, something he later said he deeply regretted. There were also behind-the-scenes negotiations around his workload and compensation, as Berghoff sought more flexibility to manage his personal life. The production reportedly tried to accommodate him, but ultimately, he made the decision to leave the show during its 8th season. Unlike Rogers' abrupt exit, Berghoff's departure was given a proper send-off. The 2-part farewell episode is widely remembered as one of the most emotional storylines in the series, ending with the quiet, nearly wordless scene of the character walking away, leaving behind a small piece of himself. After M*A*S*H, Berghoff stepped back from the spotlight considerably. He appeared in a short-lived spin-off, but largely moved away from acting altogether, devoting his time to painting, wildlife conservation, and even inventing, holding several patents over the years. He's largely stayed out of the public eye since, but remains fondly remembered by fans for bringing humanity to one of the show's most memorable characters. Not every departure was about personal struggles or contract disputes. Sometimes, an actor simply recognized that their character had run its course. Larry Linville played Major Frank Burns, the rigid, self-important rival who served as comic relief in the show's earlier seasons. Burns was the character audiences loved to dislike, but as the series matured and other characters became more layered, Frank largely stayed the same. His one-note nature, which worked early on, started to feel out of step with where the show was heading. By the end of season 5, Linville made the decision not to renew his contract. By most accounts, this wasn't a dramatic falling out. He reportedly felt he'd taken the character as far as it could go, and recognized that the show was evolving in a direction that didn't have much room left for Frank Burns. His character was written out off-screen, given a promotion elsewhere, allowing the show to move toward more nuanced conflicts without needing a cartoonish villain. Linville continued working in television afterward, taking on guest roles, though he never found a part as memorable as Frank Burns. His exit while not as widely discussed as some others, marked a real turning point in the show's tone, opening the door for a different kind of antagonist. The slow burn replacement. Stepping into the void left by Linville's departure was Charles Emerson Winchester III, played by David Ogden Stiers. Where Frank Burns was loud and obvious, Winchester was cultured, guarded, and quietly complicated. Stiers brought a restraint to the role that made Winchester one of the show's most interesting characters by its final seasons. Unlike most of the actors on this list, Stiers stayed with the show until its very end, choosing not to leave early, but to see the character's arc through. When offered a chance to continue in the spin-off that followed M*A*S*H, he reportedly declined, feeling that Winchester's story had been told completely. After the show, Stiers built a long career doing voice work, including for several well-known animated projects. Later in his life, he spoke publicly about his sexuality, something he kept private for much of his career due to concerns about how it might affect his opportunities in the industry at the time. He passed away in 2018, remembered for both his range as performer and the quiet courage it took to live openly later in life. While so many of the men on this list came and went, one cast member remained for the entire run of the series. Major Margaret Houlihan, played by Loretta Swit, started out as something of a punchline, defined largely by a nickname from the original film. But Swit pushed back against that early framing. Over 11 seasons, she gradually transformed Margaret into one of the show's most complex characters, a decorated officer who openly grappled with the morality of war while still doing her job with precision. She was one of only a handful of actors to appear in both the very first episode and the series finale, and her persistence in shaping the character is often credited with giving the show's only major female role real depth and staying power. What's striking, looking back at all these departures, is how different each one really was. Some left out of frustration, some out of exhaustion, some simply because they felt their story had been told. A couple of these exits became iconic television moments, while others happened so quietly that most viewers barely noticed at the time. But through all the cast changes, M*A*S*H managed to keep its core identity intact, a show about the absurdity and tragedy of war, told through characters who felt real, flawed, and human. Maybe that's part of why it's still remembered so fondly today. Not despite all the behind-the-scenes turbulence, but in some ways because of it. What do you think? Which of these departures surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this look back, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Continuing with additional detail and depth on each section, it's worth pausing on just how unusual M*A*S*H was for its time. Network executives were nervous about a comedy set during wartime, especially one that didn't shy away from showing the cost of that war. There was no laugh track during operating room scenes. The sound of helicopters often replaced any kind of musical for everything that followed. The show wasn't just asking audiences to laugh. It was asking them to sit with discomfort, then laugh anyway, because that's often how people survive difficult situations. This tension between comedy and reality, between ensemble and stardom, ended up shaping almost every major cast departure on this list. As one actor's role expanded, others sometimes felt their shrinking. As the show pushed toward more serious storytelling, some actors found new creative opportunities, while others found the grind harder to sustain. Keeping that context in mind makes each individual story make a lot more sense. One detail that often gets lost is just how protective the show's creators were of their anti-war message, even when it meant making a painful choice about a beloved character. The writers reportedly considered several different ways to write the character off before settling on the version that aired. The idea was simple but devastating. This is a war, and in war, people don't always come home, no matter how much we love them or how much we wish otherwise. What made the moment land so hard was the way it was filmed. Most of the cast reportedly didn't know in advance how the scene would play out. Only one actor was informed ahead of time, so the moment could be captured accurately. And the visible shock on the other actors' faces in that final scene was largely genuine. That authenticity is part of why the scene still gets referenced decades later as one of the most powerful moments in sitcom history. For the actor at the center of it, the years that followed were a mixed bag. He found some success outside of M*A*S*H, but nothing that matched the cultural impact of the role he'd left behind. In later interviews, he was candid about feeling like he'd misjudged the situation, separating the affection audiences had for his character from any sense that it translated to him personally as a star. It's a lesson that's been repeated by other actors leaving long-running ensemble shows over the decades since. The character and the actor aren't always the same thing in the eyes of the audience, even when the performance is what made the character work in the first place. The abruptness of this departure created a real challenge for the writing team. Ensemble comedies depend on established chemistry, and losing one half of a defining duo without warning meant the show had to recalibrate quickly. The decision to bring in a new character with a different energy, calmer, more reflective, ended up reshaping not just one role, but the overall rhythm of the series going forward. It's interesting to consider how this departure compares to the one before it. One actor left with a dramatic, heavily publicized send-off that became part of television history. The other left so quietly that many casual viewers might not have even registered a change beyond a new face in a familiar uniform. Yet both departures came from a similar underlying frustration, a sense that an ensemble show was becoming less of an ensemble. What's notable is that despite the messy nature of the exit, there's little evidence of any lasting bitterness. The actor went on to build a completely different career path later in life, stepping away from entertainment in favor of finance, and former castmates continued to speak about him with warmth and humor for years. Sometimes the cleanest endings, in terms of public reaction, come from the messiest departures behind the scenes. This particular departure is one of the more poignant ones, because it wasn't really about creative differences or feeling overshadowed. It was about a person reaching a breaking point. Long-running shows are demanding in ways that aren't always visible to audiences. Long hours, time away from family, and the pressure of playing a character that millions of people feel they know personally. For an actor whose character was often described as the emotional center of the show, carrying that weight for years took a real toll. The decision to leave wasn't made lightly, and by most accounts, it came down to prioritizing personal well-being and family over continuing in a role that had brought both tremendous recognition and significant strain. What stands out is how the show handled this exit compared to some of the others. Rather than writing the character off quickly or quietly, the production gave it the space it deserved, resulting in one of the most quietly devastating send-offs in the series. It's a reminder that sometimes the right way to honor someone's contribution is simply to let them go gracefully, rather than holding on too tightly. This departure offers a useful contrast to the others, because it's really a story about a character outliving its usefulness rather than an actor outgrowing the show. Early seasons of any series often rely on simpler, more exaggerated character types to establish conflict and comedy. As a show matures, those simpler types can start to feel like relics of an earlier version of the series. The actor in this case seemed to recognize that shift before it became a problem. Rather than waiting to be written out or pushed into an increasingly thin role, the decision was made proactively. That kind of self-awareness is relatively rare in long-running television, and it speaks to a level of perspective about the character's purpose within the larger story. The ripple effects of this exit were significant, even if they weren't dramatized on screen. Removing a one-dimensional antagonist opened up space for more nuanced conflict rooted in circumstance and morality rather than personality flaws.